the slow but steady increase of even nation state level supply chain attacks are what really scare me the most. My usual pro tip for people is if you're ever running a war room to try to increase budget for your security program, make a supply chain take over your example, because those things don't come in over the internet. Technically they do, but they're getting uploaded and have total trust control to all of your environment. And then you're basically just giving an attacker a shell to the core of your infrastructure. The ones that we detect are always by accident. It's like a guy who's really strong at benchmarking his SQL stuff and then notices like, oh, why is this taking so long? The fact that we've detected these this way tells me that it must be way more prevalent than we think it is.
O3C Cybersecurity Podcast.
Welcome back to the O3 Cybersecurity Podcast. For today's episode, we are going to talk about the cloud threat landscape. And for that, I have my great co-host, Karim, with me.
Hey, everyone. Great to be back. Thanks for having me again, Håkon.
It's our pleasure. And it used to be your podcast, so I guess I have to invite you back on every now and then. Last time, we spoke about cloud threat detection with Anya from DNB. She mentioned TI, cloud threat actors, cloud IOCs, etc., plethora of times. So I thought we should take a step back and discuss the cloud threat landscape. And for that, we have James Berthoty from Latio Tech with us. Thank you for being on the show, James.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. So, James, many of our listeners, I'm going to guess, know who you are. You're quite vocal on LinkedIn. You post a lot of great content. But for our listeners that don't know you, who are you and what do you do?
My name's James. I got into security from the help desk into systems administration side of things. And then really, generally, I think of DevOps as just systems people who bothered to learn Kubernetes. And so I was just one of those people that bothered to learn Kubernetes and got into security at ReliaQuest was my first fully security job. But before that, obviously touched security in the way that a lot of sysadmins tend to do. And then when I was at ReliaQuest, they're a big managed detection response provider with their own SOC platform that's microservice based and all of that stuff. And so I got to dive headfirst into modern security architectures, which was fun to do alongside a lot of people who were learning it as well, because it was pretty early when all of these technologies were new and we were dealing with big data infrastructures with like Kafka and streaming services and really at the front lines of a lot of the emerging microservice concerns. And then alongside those things was arising different tools for SCA scanning, SAST, DAST, different approaches in a microservice DevOps world, building CI/CD pipelines, and all of these modern deployment methodologies combined with early CNAPP tools really gave me a lot of different hands-on experience across a lot of different tools where I was just, as part of being at an MDR where we were also setting up and deploying a lot of these tools for people, getting to learn it from that perspective, but also just from wanting to be a security company ourselves, getting hands-on so that we could guide customers on emerging trends and what to do. Used a lot of that hands-on experience and went over to a startup called Very Good Security, where we were making what was the control platform, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was fun to make. It was a SOC 2 automation competitor in the Vanta Drata space. And that was a huge learning experience as far as how to sell a product, build a product. I was building a lot of the detection rules for how is SOC 2 getting met by all of these different providers and platforms, doing a lot of sales engineering, like just the crazy startup life. And really there got a vision into what startups care about security for and the reality of the SOC 2 process, which could be its own podcast episode of how insane that process is at this point. But then from there went back to ReliaQuest and did just picked up where I left off with product security, application security, cloud security, all that stuff. And then moved to PagerDuty, and that was a different experience because my primary responsibility there was getting us through the FedRAMP authorization process, and that is a living nightmare for a cloud-native environment. The framework's just not at all, in my opinion, built for cloud native architectures and all of that. And so it's a crazy experience trying to do that. So then once we got that accomplished along the way, I started to share a lot of my experiences with different CNAPPs on LinkedIn and saw that there was a big demand for people looking for differentiation when everyone says they're doing the same stuff. Like right now, I was laughing because I was refreshing LinkedIn yesterday and today, and there was a new post every time I refreshed about announcing our MCP server and our AI agents. And so you go to RSA this year, and it's going to be nothing but like, we're agentic AI. And if you're a security engineer, like, how are you supposed to have any hope of determining, there's a whole foundation of startups that were built for agentic AI and actually have some neat little use cases for it. And then there's tons of people just trying to like go after the marketing juice and hype around it. So a lot of the goal of Latiotech is to try to help engineers make informed buying decisions. Unfortunately, in cybersecurity, it's not always engineers making informed decisions, but there's a lot of weird trust-based CISO sales, I'll call it. But outside of that, really the goal is to create a more transparent and trusted buying ecosystem for security tools. So luckily that grew enough that I was able to go full-time with it about a year ago. So I have now done most things of being at a startup, a mid-market, an enterprise, and now running my own thing with Latio.
So the perfect background to be on this episode, I guess.
Yes, I mean, it's been I don't ever underestimate how crazy it was getting into cloud security when I did, and then the challenge that still exists with getting new people into it, because I think Kubernetes is at the heart of the knowledge gap that exists within cloud. And I always try to call that out. Like my advice every talk I do is you should go learn Kubernetes because it really just opens up. That is the key thing that opens up careers outside of security, like to DevOps, to SRE, to platform, to advancing in your development role, to advancing in your security role. Like that is the gap. And then the rest of cloud, in my opinion, is really built around how do we maintain and deploy services around this stateless containerized architecture.
Yeah, the knowledge gap on Kubernetes, that really resonates with us as well. And not to make this episode about O3 Cyber, but we kind of saw we had a gap there ourselves and had to find someone who could be like our leading figure and help all of us understand Kubernetes. So definitely agree. So before we dive into the main topic of today, I just wanted I kind of feel your background is quite similar to James Karim, coming from like the service desk and then becoming a security person through kind of experiences and taking on more and more security responsibility. And you ended up doing a lot of cloud threat detection later on in your career.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you're at the help desk, it's like either you figure out how to solve everything or you become nothing and you're just going to sit there for 10 years. So it's kind of like the ultimate motivation, but also you have the ultimate learning curve. So I can really relate to that as well, James, where it's like you can either fix a problem or you can own it and just like figure out a way to like sandbag the problem, but it's not going to go away by itself. And then going from that to like seeing the rise of malware, it was kind of like a call to, okay, use your like generic service or help desk expertise to now counter malware with OS hardening, for instance, or other measures that are cheap.
Yeah, there's two things there. One is I usually rant a lot about how we don't value help desk retention enough this is like a separate IT rant, I guess. But people get really good at help desk, and unfortunately help desk is viewed as like the starting career place before you evolve into, sysadmin, whatever. But I like people would do help desk longer if you paid them more and like made it just made more tiers and rewarded people for staying in it longer. Because I think to your point, like it is the front line for every issue, and you never know when something's going to turn into a bigger sysadmin problem or not. And then when I was getting into security from that route, like, first of all, I think a lot of people aren't even aware of security as an industry because most SMBs don't have a SOC, like have no concept of that. before I was at ReliaQuest, I didn't know what a SOC was really. Like it was just something I had never crossed being at these mid-sized companies. But I didn't realize that's what I was doing when I was installing firewalls, managing ESET, antivirus. Like it was just part of what we were doing as a managed service provider. I just didn't realize that that scaled to a larger and more defense in depth sort of approach for bigger companies. And I think now that security is becoming more accessible to SMBs in general through tools like Aikido, Sneak, whatever on the code scanning side, and then on the runtime side, a lot of SMBs looking at CNAPPs to get. I think that they're sort of hitting security for the first time, and that's what's creating a lot of both the confusion and the demand around all these different tools. So
definitely. And both of you have been through this journey, so that's very interesting. Following the threat actors from traditional on-premises networks and systems and into the cloud. How would you guys say the threat actors, TTPs, objectives, etc., have changed?
You reminded me of something I haven't thought about in a long time, which was a ransomware. Well, I guess when I was at a MSP, we dealt with 2 ransomware incidents, and one of them, like, I had to drive to this towing company and unplug the server and like physically take it back to our office to do forensics on. And I just haven't even thought about that in a long time. And again, that was my job title there was systems engineer. Like there was no security there, but that's what I was doing. But most of what I saw in on-prem world were ransomware based attacks. And I think it took advantage of backups being being far from ubiquitous, and a lot of Windows deployment methodologies that could easily crawl and expand across the network. That was probably the defining really costly attack outside of like end user targeting stuff, was ransomware across Windows devices. And I think unfortunately there's a large segment of the security industry that still thinks that way. But cloud native architecture just totally changes the risk profile, where we're still talking about ransomware, but I mean, you could ransomware my Kubernetes nodes all day. Like I don't care. It'll just spin up more pods, more nodes, and we can move on. And that's a little facetious. Obviously I do care and would try to fix it, but really a lot of the challenges have fundamentally changed, where backups make less sense for stateless services. Ransomware makes less sense of a threat. And so I think we're starting to slowly see this shift. And this is backed up by stuff like the Verizon report, and Mandiant articles about the increase of web-based applications. And I think there's a lot of things that are driving that. The first is even pre-AI, but now with AI, access to development skills is more accessible than ever. I regularly use ChatGPT to write low-level C exploits, and I don't know how to code in C, but it sure lets me. It works. And we even see this with the most recent Erlang SSH vulnerability, where a research firm was able to take the changelog and just plug it in ChatGPT and cook up an exploit with it for it within an hour. And that's the kind of exploit that would have been freaking nightmarish to try to make before AI, because the people who know Erlang really well is a really small subset of the universe, I guess. And trying to create an exploit with no information would have been pretty impossible or just really challenging. And that's why that was the guardrails that most people had against cloud attacks, was like, maybe someone's probably not going to bother to try to do this. But now CVEs have become a big public drama performance where you can get a lot of social media clout. Bug bounty programs are bigger than ever, where people can make money off of doing exploits and learning how they work. So there's a big open social media industry, combined with the rise of open source across everything, to where there's a lot more data points out there, and it's easier than ever to do a web exploit. And so I think that's the primary thing that's changing, is that application exploits in the cloud are getting a lot more common and more targeted, because it's easier than ever to do. And then the other side is the idea of the importance of identity has increased, where before the cloud, people really relied on their network controls to do all of their protection mechanisms. Because you could really have a tight VPN tunnels between your offices, and then be pretty secure from most things, because if someone can't get to it over the network, they can't do anything. But now with cloud, there are so many ways to make resources public, so many ways in which resources are public by design, that stealing one authentication token can often lead to crazy unexpected consequences. And so I think that's what we've seen with like the Okta breach, and some other ones that I'm just not coming to mind immediately. But the idea that a compromised user credential now expands much further than it once did. It's not like you're just using it to access their laptop, but you're using it to access all of their SaaS applications, all of their cloud applications, and then pivoting the sensitive data from there. And so I think both those are the two main things that have changed, is first on the identity front and the interconnectedness of it, and then second on the application side of the exploits. And then maybe third even is the slow but steady increase of even nation state level supply chain attacks are what really scare me the most. My usual pro tip for people is, if you're ever running a war room to try to increase budget for your security program, make a supply chain take over your example, because those things don't come in over the internet. I mean, technically they do, but not in a way that most people are telling that they are, because they're in your build systems. They're getting uploaded and have total trust control to all of your environment. And then you're basically just giving an attacker a shell to the core of your infrastructure. And there's very little security visibility at the moment into these sorts of attacks. And the ones that we detect are always by accident. Whether it's TJ actions and seeing the output of credentials in log files, or if it's xzutils and it's like a guy who's really strong at benchmarking his SQL stuff, and then notices like, oh, why is this taking so long? That the fact that we've detected these this way tells me that it must be way more prevalent than we think it is.
I think that's kind of goes straight to at least one of the things we see a lot, Karim. It's kind of, there's a reason why we're doing two talks in May on CI/CD attacks, and we had a discussion internally here in O3 Cyber after the TJ Actions incident on kind of how mature or skilled are actually the threat actors. Because if you've already have access to this action that's so distributed, why would you not just try to exfiltrate those secrets instead of pasting them to the logs? It makes no source. And like on the back of that, what are your thoughts about the maturity and the skill level of these cloud conscious threat actors, James?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. What was interesting about the TJ Actions thing is we only detected it once it was a low skill sort of attack, but initially, like it sort of got wider and less skilled over time. I don't think that these attacks really require too much skill to get done anymore. Just because it's become so much more ubiquitous, the whole ecosystem and the way in which you would do an attack, combined with a lot of runtime protection in cloud environments, just lags so much that you can't really rely on it the same way, which is why I'm always talking about this new CADR category that I'm trying to push people to make. Because if I think about the exploits that I've seen actually happen, the successful pen tests that have actually been done in organizations I've been a part of, they all rely on different injections of malware within either the CI/CD or through a web app. And those are the two things that I feel like we've built our cloud and application security programs the wrong way, because we're just scanning for CVEs and misconfigurations endlessly, which is still important to do, but you're always going to have some debt of either malware potential or CVE misconfigurations that exist in an environment that a tool either can't pick up or it's something you can't fix. And this is where I think the fact that our runtime protection has really lagged in containerized environments makes it so that I really can't trust that an EDR running in a Kubernetes cluster is going to detect a malware that's injected through a CI/CD pipeline. It might, it's possible, but this is where I think we really need to focus in on being able to trust our runtime protection more than we have been able to historically.
Definitely. And based on that, do you see or do you believe or feel that the threat actor landscape is very dynamic and adaptable to both the security controls we put in place, the new guardrails we develop, and the tools we develop, or is it more of a static type of group that is just kind of going through all environments they can find until that exploit or primitive is used?
Yeah, I feel like what we're seeing more is a shift to trying to target specific institutions. Because that's really the way, if you're going to try to pull some of this stuff off, it needs to be targeted in a way that just hosting like a phishing website wasn't as targeted. But there are almost all of the major breaches that I can think of in recent memory that are cloud-based involve either targeting a specific employee through credentials, whether it was the DevOps employee who's like a gaming driver got compromised, or specific help desk employees who got compromised, or it's the targeted web app exploitation. The exception to that is when we have some of these really bad in the news vulnerabilities where people can just mass scan the internet and deploy things, which does still happen. I'm thinking of like the Ingress Nightmare vulnerability that was disclosed recently. It is pretty easy to scan the internet for exposed ingress admission controllers and running attacks against those. So they definitely still happen. There's a speed of the big public attacks where you can kind of just spray everything. I'm thinking of websites like Grey Hat Warfare, where you can just get a list of like all public facing cloud assets. And that's updated in minutes. Whenever I've pushed an AWS credential to GitHub just to test, like it starts getting used within 30 seconds. There's a lot of public crawlers that are out there. Some of them, ironically, are security tools, which is really funny. But all that to say that that's the nature of when we deploy a misconfiguration at this point, it can start getting exploited within 30 seconds. And I think that's what's really scary on the big blast radius side that's not targeted is, you know, this gets more in line with the importance of having guardrails in place and secure by design and that whole initiative. Yes, to protect against some of those more common misconfigurations.
And you mentioned CADR, so I'm going to guess that's Cloud Application Detection Response.
Yeah, this is my special category that I'm inventing, but I promise it's helpful. The idea behind it is right now, detection response in the cloud is in a weird place because you have CWPP, which was sort of neglected as part of CNAPP, which is Cloud Workload Protection Platform. CNAPP is Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. Unfortunately, with CNAPPs, the application part tended to get ignored and is still mostly ignored. Like these things are fundamentally container detection response tools plus some kind of misconfiguration vulnerability scanning on top of it. And that doesn't really give you any insight into your application. And so you end up having this emerging category called ADR, which is application detection response. And there's only a few companies that do it because it's a new, unproven market, and they're using some really unique technologies, all of them a little bit different, in order to get greater visibility into your application. And so not just looking at, is this container exposed somewhere, but what functions is it executing? What is the code doing when it's running? Can we profile these applications and try to get a sense of a baseline of how they behave? And getting a lot of deep insights into like actual traffic, actual function executions, things that are happening to your application. And then alongside that, you have this new push towards cloud detection response from a lot of people, which is CDR. And that's sort of this kind of naive evolution of CWPP into what if we could correlate some container alerts with some cloud alerts and some basic cross correlations. And a lot of that is just, a lot of this emphasis is because CSPM is sort of a solved problem at this point, because it's pretty easy to, whether you're using Prowler or some open source CSPM or building your own, it's just, there's no differentiation anymore. And a lot of people have some sense of a program of what to do about it. And so now there's this greater shift into the runtime. And so the idea of CADR is to combine the components of CWPP and cloud detection with some of the emerging capabilities of application detection and response platforms to create one agent that essentially gives you all of the runtime security you need. And so I think of this as just, it's CrowdStrike, but for cloud assets. because the idea behind CDR is everywhere I've ever been, trying to do runtime security in the SOC has been a failure. And that's because the SOC, like we talked about, we started by talking about the Kubernetes skill gap. And for a first semester out of school SOC analyst, like most SOC analysts are, like there's no hope that they're going to be able to respond to an alert that's like drifted Java process on container. Like there's too many layers of confusion of what's happening, and it creates this process where they just have to ask the DevOps team over and over and over again, did this happen? Is this correct? Is this right? Is this right? And the DevOps team doesn't know. Like they've got to check with the application owners, and it creates this big, crazy process where no one knows what they're doing. And so the idea behind CADR is that if we introduce the application layer into this, it helps it make so much sense that even a SOC analyst can take action to some of these alerts. Because when a new process starts on a container, if I'm a SOC analyst and I just see that alert, I have no way of actually knowing, is this a good or bad thing? However, if I see a SQL injection that then starts a process, 100% of the time that's a bad thing. Like no DevOps person is like, let me get a shell to this container by injecting a SQL command. And then you expand that to all of the other types of OWASP vulnerabilities where did this malicious drift happen within a container because of SSRF or cross-site scripting or remote code execution, buffer overflow? All of these things are relying on the fact that the container layer and the application layer of cloud applications are so closely tied together that they impact each other. And so ultimately, CADR to me is a vast improvement of the old way of doing runtime security in the cloud by introducing this application layer. And then this also expands into benefits for vulnerability management, where they can actually see not just is this package loaded in a container, which every CNAPP does now, but specifically what functions are executing within that package, and then tying that together with the vulnerable functions of the packages, and let you know if you're vulnerable based on the function executions, and then eventually even detecting and blocking on those things. So that's my pitch for why CADR exists. And it's helpful because it's combining categories. It's not creating like another new acronym for people to learn. It's making it so that hopefully there's less of them.
Karim, based on your experience and the current cloud threat landscape we are observing, do you think it's reasonable to expect that an organization of a decent size should be able to monitor and defend their cloud systems without any of these specialized tools? Or do you have to go out and buy point solutions or a platform to solve this issue?
Right. I think I'm kind of divided there. Like if you go 5 years back, I'd say definitely not. Like you're better off trying to build some of the stuff yourself, like, or adopting some open source stuff and then doing some automation around it. But like seeing where this CNAPP space has evolved and what's possible there, I think I'd rather buy a CNAPP than trying to build all this stuff myself and use my agent-based vulnerability scanner in the cloud. So like we've gotten to a point of cloud now where like that's established and that's good. Now in terms of like, I'm always very about like new product categories like CADR, which we're mentioning here. I like the way you're describing it. I think there's a good market fit for it. But then we also got to remember, like we've had like Twistlock, which was acquired by Palo Alto for a while. We've had Contrast Security, which I think you have some experience with. Like we have some of these tools now. So it sounds like if we could just further develop these tools to become like do what they intended to do, like continue investing down that route, and also look at like where we are with the cloud detection and response today. So CDR, and then have some sort of fusion between these two products, then we basically have the CADR category invented.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely the idea behind it, is that those companies will get there. I think they're going to have to do it via acquisition though, just because what the ADR companies have been doing has been public for a while, but I'm trusting that it's really difficult to do just by the fact that not everyone does it. Unlike the AI agents thing that everyone's got an MCP server. Like clearly that's not a moat. But I do think the application layer insights are pretty challenging to get. And there's a lot of reasons for that, whether it's because essentially what we're talking about is eBPF getting from the kernel space to the user space. And that is a very difficult thing to do at scale for a lot of languages without causing huge performance hits across the board. So I agree in the sense that at some point, every CNAPP will have some flavor of CADR type functionality. But more and more, I've been advocating for a I'm a CNAPP hater in the sense of I actually don't think it should exist. I get, and let me asterisk that with, if you have a large static infrastructure footprint that has a lot of either EC2 Linux instances or Windows instances, but it's not a heavily containerized environment, I think that's the main value of CSPM. And I think that's why it's been so successful for the last 10 years, is because that's how most people did a lift and shift because their executives said, I want to fire our IT team. And then they accidentally had to hire a bunch of DevOps team instead. And now their AWS bill costs more than their data center bill did. And so that's its own problem. But that was the fundamental idea of let's lift and shift to the cloud. And those are the companies that there's a little bit of buzz around, like, what if we move back on-prem? Because the cloud's benefit is being able to push new technologies very quickly. Like as soon as it comes out, you can have, like trying to host your own Gen AI application on-prem, so much harder than just plugging into Bedrock or the Azure OpenAI service or using those SDKs and APIs. Like that's the fundamental benefit of cloud. But if I'm running a manufacturing center and I'm not using any of this stuff, like I don't really need any of that. It's probably costing me more than it's helping. But all that to say that the CSPMs are great for that architecture because they agentless scan the vulnerabilities and they can detect misconfigurations, and your Windows Defender, CrowdStrike, whatever, probably still worked on those systems okay. But the containerized architectures are such a different beast where the core features of CSPM, I think, just don't even really matter at all. Like they provide no benefit because it's just vulnerability scanning host nodes. Like that doesn't matter. You're primarily using them as container scanners and then misconfigurations. But without an agent, you can't even really get Kubernetes misconfigurations very well because you need to be inside the cluster to see how it's actually misconfigured. And to me, that's why I more and more recommend people who have cloud native architectures to not go the CNAPP route, but to try to do this ASPM plus CADR thing. And for me, ASPM includes some kind of cloud misconfiguration scanning because there's a lot of tools out there now that do that. But also so you do all of your DevOps scanning. So that's SAST, DAST, SCA, secrets, container, and there's like two more that all of this scanning of all of your code, basically IAC was the big other one. So you scan all of that for misconfigurations, and that's when you detect vulnerabilities and you give it to developers to fix. Because there is no manual patch process. No one is going in and like apt-get upgrading stuff. It's all happening in pipeline. And so you want the vulnerability scanning to happen on the left. And then you're really using the CNAPP functionality you should care the most about is the runtime CADR piece. And so this is a lot of why Latio exists, is to try to put these CNAPPs on a scale, because Orca is a very different CNAPP than Aqua, which is different from Sysdig. And I think even the Orca Aqua partnership is an example of how they acknowledge that there's times you would want both. But to me, I would rather keep it distinct, where we're really talking about the CADR capabilities are what matter on the runtime, and then the ASPM capabilities are what matter on the left side. And then this agentless CNAPP idea is really useful for these large static infrastructures. But if you don't have that, then it's not really a super helpful set of capabilities.
How do we get the CADR-like capabilities for the CI/CD systems, like we talked about earlier? Like, is there anyone that's solving that right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's the hard part about that specific part. So that a lot of the way that Oligo, Raven, and Migo are the three biggest ADRs that do this capability, where when you're looking at a supply chain package, you can baseline the activities it makes to different system calls and how it functions. And then they can actually spot deviations from that at runtime and then block even syscalls that try to get made by the underlying application library. And that is an example of how to prevent supply chain attacks at runtime. And it's an example of why I think CADR is so important. But as far as protecting, there's this other, so that's the bucket of approaches I would say is like, hey, just put this your build systems as well, and it's fine. But the other approach to take that hasn't really taken off in the market because it's kind of overly complicated. I think it comes across as a niche solution, even though I think it's very important. It's the kind of thing people don't really buy as much, which is this idea of like hardened security runners. Cycode has like a runtime eBPF agent called Simon. Step Security, who found the initial TJ Actions thing, offers these like built-in secure runners. And I think it just comes across as a niche solution, but like, yes, it's there, and it's definitely a part of more and more what ASPM solutions can offer, whether it's tools like Socket, for example, have ways to do NPM installs where first it'll check for malware upstream. So I think more and more ASPM people are building in some of these supply chain protections, but then the runtime side, I think, applies even more, where ideally I can just trust the fundamental idea of CADR is this agent exists on this workload, so I don't need to freak out all the time. To me, that's the CrowdStrike correlation is if people have CrowdStrike on their endpoints, like their Windows laptops, they feel fine. Like, I'm not staying awake at night worried about a user getting a malicious PDF file or something. Like, CrowdStrike will stop it. And so I want that same feeling, but for my cloud workloads. And every time I've used legacy EDR tools, which is, people always say, oh, that's a funny thing to say, whatever. But their container detections are just really bad. And that's just me talking. So,
I mean, there's a reason Sysdig has been around for a long time and done quite well.
Yeah. And that's Sysdig's an example of, that's why I bring up them and Aqua of the first generation of CNAPPs. We're definitely the most advanced on this runtime stuff. And so they've got a big head start on the runtime side. But then you've got WizDefend doing a good job. Orca has an agent now. And then you've got, on the other side, these emergent Armo, Upwind, and Sweet, all emerging CNAPP players who were built more fundamentally for containerized architectures. And so I think they have a big advantage at this runtime detection stuff.
If we look ahead a bit, how do you see the threat landscape evolving going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're already seeing it with every time there is buzz around a vulnerability disclosure, it creates a wave of exploits faster than anyone can anticipate. And you combine that with just using AI to create whatever exploits on the fly. I think that's the future of exploits. And the other piece of that is the attempt to pivot between layers of the application stack. And I think people miss this with cloud security a lot too, where the application exploit is the starting point, because what they want is the cloud hosted data. And we have a lot of implicit trust between our workloads and the backend services that they use, whether it's RDS databases or S3 buckets or whatever. And that is the trust that's the goal to exploit with these application exploits. So I think between that and then I think nation states especially are seeing how easy it is to break supply chain into a lot of critical infrastructure. I think those two things are just going to continue to be on the rise. And then the Windows stuff doesn't go away as much as I wish it would. But it's always there doing its thing.
And Karim, what about you?
No, I think I think you're onto something there, James. I don't have too strong opinions, but I think there's one thing we forget when we talk about cloud security and threat landscape, and that's really like we talk about, like, if you only have containers and cloud native stuff, then you're good. But then we have the reality for most organizations, which is really they have hybrid stuff. Yep. I think we'll continue to see like clouds being compromised from the hybrid vector as well. People are focusing on building really secure cloud infrastructure. It's easy, you could argue, because you have really good tools for it, but then reality is you also have on-prem or hybrid in many cases. And I think like that hybrid part is one, it poses a significant risk to your cloud environment in terms of what are the different assets there? Do you have Active Directory and like a hybrid environment? I know Mandiant had a really good talk about this on Forward CloudSec in US. I think it was last year in US on how companies are compromised from on-prem going into cloud. And then we have the risk of like, are the cloud providers going to start pushing EDR agents to on-prem, which aren't going to be good at detecting the traditional on-prem attacks, and then creating basically blind spots because they have a good market coverage? I don't know.
Something I've joked before is that the C and CADR should really be for containers, because I think that's what, like, fundamentally using Armo or whatever CADR tool on for an on-premise Kubernetes cluster is going to be just as much better than CrowdStrike as it is in the cloud. And then the CrowdStrike Windows agent is going to be just as much better on a Windows server in the cloud as whatever CNAPP Windows agent. And I think that's the fundamental struggle. To your point, though, is there is a very real budget conflict here and a very real gap where I definitely think this is the defining conversation from a like analyst market perspective of the next probably 5 to 10 years of cloud security is going to be if people can drive market share away from CrowdStrike for runtime agent-based protection. We see Palo going all in with it with Cortex. We see the rise of WizDefend. We see people like Upwind offering their own MDR services. Like there's clearly demand for runtime, but it requires a reshaping of the SOC that's still in flight. When I talk to most SOC teams that I know, the cloud security team is still very separate from the traditional SOC, and they're still the ones that get all of the alerts. And that's why, to me, the key has been, how can you make this so simple that any SOC analyst can get it and doesn't have to treat it like a crazy different reality? But the flip side to that is, like, CrowdStrike is very entrenched in the SOC. It has a well-deserved, very positive industry reputation. And so, when I even talk to the SOC about the idea of using something besides CrowdStrike in the abstract, they're like, oh, I love CrowdStrike. But then they've literally never used it on containers and don't know what a container is. And so that there's like, that's half of it. That's the weird like brand part of this too, is they've got a strong brand because people don't know how Kubernetes works. So, yeah.
True.
James, it's been a total pleasure to have you on. Really appreciate the discussions we've had. Before we close up, do you have anything going on? You have a blog, you have a podcast, you have your LinkedIn page. What do you want to plug?
Sure. I guess all those things. Pulse.latio.tech is the newsletter, podcast, all that stuff. Following me on LinkedIn is the best way to get just whatever daily thought I have about anything. And then list.latio.tech is the site for finding security tools. And the goal there is to I never want someone to not get a tool just because they weren't aware of it. And I think that's a huge problem. And that's why that directory exists, is a lot of times people think the only AppSec solutions, for example, for a long time, people thought it was only Veracode and checkmarks. And then Sneak got big enough that now people, like, every time you see on Reddit, like, what should I use? It's like, I like Sneak, I like checkmarks. And it's like, guys, there's like 30 other vendors you could look at. Like it's not just 3 vendors that do this stuff. So that's the goal there. If you're looking for security tools, to just help people get quick ideas of what's there.
Great stuff. We'll make sure the links for that are in the captions. And for us, Karim, we're going to Barcelona end of next month, doing a talk at both the OWASP Global AppSec and the ThreatModCon, both being about CI/CD. So if you're in Barcelona, reach out and let's meet up. And until next time, thank you for listening.
Thanks, guys.